The Rock Whisperer. Do you hear the earth talking to you?
Hi, I'm Maddie DeManch. I teach at Claytown Middle School in Connecticut, and I'm here with Tim Diggs from Saudi Aramco. Do you want to explain a little bit about what you do to start?
Sure. I'm a senior geological consultant with Aramco Services Company. We're a subsidiary of Saudi Aramco, and there are various groups within Aramco Services Company that have different responsibilities. There are research groups that do research into geology, geophysics. There are other ones that do research into resins and so on. They're based in Boston and do work with MIT. And then there's another research group in Detroit that does work on mechanics. I'm an upstream ASC, and I'm a geologist. A lot of what I do is aimed at creating curricula for our new hires for the most part. So to that end, I've created 2 courses, each one of them 5 days, and they're on characterization of oil and gas reservoirs that have different rock types. So basically there are sandstones and limestones. So I've developed coursework to characterize those types of reservoirs. We also do technology reconnaissance, and we make recommendations to Saudi Aramco when we see technology that we think may help them do their jobs better.
Cool. All right. So when did you first know that you wanted to study geoscience?
I was at the University of Virginia. I was 3 years into a chemistry major. Yes. And I took a geology class in the fall just to fulfill another science requirement.
And then fell in love with it.
And I fell in love with it because we would take these weekend field trips in central Virginia in the fall. So, the sky is blue, the leaves are changing, the birds are singing.
You're not stuck in a chem lab.
You're not stuck in a chem lab with a bunch of chemicals and fume hoods. But what really got to me is we looked at some Paleozoic sandstones. They started off in very deep water, and during the collision of the African plate and the North American plate, these will not only crushed together and folded, but actually overturned.
Okay.
So these deep water sandstones that were once thousands of feet below the ocean surface are now thousands of feet above sea level and turned upside down.
Very cool.
And
so how did they get there?
How does this happen? So I decided, I've got to change majors now.
Nice, awesome. What was your educational path? So what colleges did you attend?
I got my undergraduate degree at University of Virginia, and that was actually in environmental sciences.
Okay.
They don't have a separate geology department, so you took core courses in geology, meteorology, ecology, and hydrogeology.
Oh, interesting.
So each one of these were core courses that were fairly difficult. You didn't want to take them if you wanted just say an easy science course, because it was a 3-hour course plus a 1-hour lab every week. And then beyond that, what you did is you just developed your own curriculum with whatever you were interested in.
Yeah.
So I had all this background in chemistry already, so I took classes in hydrology and geology, thinking that I might go to work at some point in environmental remediation or something like that. And then I went to University of Texas at Austin and got my master's degree in geology. And I actually started working on a PhD, but by that time I had been in school long enough and decided I've got to do something else.
Ready to go out into the world.
That's right.
So what was your area of research for your master's? What did you focus on?
What I worked on there was, I worked on some structures in sandstones. These coincidentally were also deep water sandstones. They formed at about the same times as one that I just described in the Appalachians. And they're part of the same chain. So if you looked at a map of paleogeography, where the North American plate was and where the African plate was at that time, they're colliding, and you can see it's hundreds, thousands of miles. But what I was looking at was deposition of these similar aged sands, how they deformed, And in these particular sandstones, there were a number of structures that people didn't really understand. It's like, well, are these something that formed very early as the sediments were being deposited? Are they features that formed late after the rocks had hardened and during tectonic deformation? This was, after the rocks were, really rocks, or did they form somewhere in between? It was somewhere between just the sands and muds being deposited on the seafloor, but maybe they were consolidated. So I was working on a series of those structures.
Trying to figure out timing. Right?
Yes.
So what has the coolest thing you have been able to do that is geoscience related?
In my career, wow, that's a really hard question. I may have to think
We can
about
come back to that one.
Well, I'd still have to think about it for a little while because on a very gross level, one of the best things about the job has been travel.
Right? Yeah.
Yes, when I was growing up in the middle of nowhere in the mountains in Virginia, by the way, we didn't get a TV until I was 6 years old. And yes, they've been invented for a long time, so I'm not that old. No, so we had World Book encyclopedias, so I used to pull them off the shelves and just look. And,
I want to go there.
Yeah, I want to go
there.
and he said, oh, that looks really neat. So I've traveled to 25 or 30 countries at this point, but I've worked on so many different projects. I guess at this point, if I had to pick one, it would be one of the last projects that I worked on at Shell, where we were looking at reservoirs that were under very thick sequences of salt. And they're very unusual. Most reservoirs in the world today have some sort of modern analog. Okay, so some may be deltas, and these could be deltas that are 300 million years old, and they now have oil and gas in them. Well, you can look at modern deltas, or you can look at deltas in surface outcrops, and you can see analogs. You can see how they fit together, what their architecture is like. These rocks, there's nothing like them anywhere.
So you have no reference
There's
point.
no reference point whatsoever.
Yeah.
The closest reference point that some people think is that they're like these very unusual and very, very old, biologically old organisms called stromatolites. They're basically blue-green algae. Well, a lot of these sediments, apparently, that are in the pre-salt, as it's called, in offshore Brazil, they look like they may have formed in association with these things. Okay. But there's just no way for anybody to know. There's no good analog.
Figure it out.
I worked on those in great detail for several years, and I was hoping to publish some of the results in scientific journals, but as commonly happens when you work in the oil industry, any kind of knowledge can be a competitive advantage. So no, you can't publish that.
Yeah.
No, you can't publish that. And then papers start coming out from other companies, and then they say, okay, well, I guess you can publish. And I was like, what's the point? But that said, I mean, it was a really interesting project. I got to do a lot of different work, and one of the reasons that I enjoyed it a lot was not only was it geology, but it also brought in a lot of chemistry. I looked at isotopes.
And probably biology.
And biology.
Yeah.
Isotopes of carbon and oxygen, of strontium, which can tell you something about, something about the actual age, because there's a strontium isotope curve that goes throughout about the last 600 to 700 million years. Okay. I worked on fluid inclusions, very small inclusions of water and oil and or gas that are trapped in crystals as they grow. Okay. So I worked on a lot of these different aspects and then pulled everything together so that we knew a lot more about what happened after these rocks were deposited. And how the structure formed, how oil migrated into them. But we still don't know exactly where they came from. Yeah. They're still really weird.
That's interesting.
Really, really weird rocks.
That is very interesting.
Plus, I got to go to Rio de Janeiro eight times. That was okay too.
Well, this kind of leads into that. What is the most memorable place you have ever traveled for your job?
I think that one would have to be a place that almost nobody goes. I was the well site geologist for a well that we drilled in the Arctic Ocean, southern part of the Arctic Ocean, actually the Chukchi Sea, in 1991. So to get there...
Yeah, how do you get there?
Yeah, well, you fly from Houston to Seattle to Anchorage to Fairbanks to Barrow.
Okay.
And then you get on a helicopter at Point Barrow and you fly 200 miles offshore.
Oh, wow.
And we were, at that point, the well was actually closer to what was then the Soviet Union than it was to the United States.
Okay.
And also for that job, you get to take fun classes like helicopter crash survival training, cold water survival training.
Just to terrify you into not doing it.
Yeah, well, it's so the company can, say, well, we gave them
covered
all the
our
training.
bases.
Yeah, well, and the helicopter crash survival training started off with a guy saying, okay, well, this is going to be 8 hours, but I'll tell you this: if your helicopter goes down in the Arctic Ocean, it's what it does. The helicopters are very top heavy. They hit the water, they turn over, and everybody drowns. So he said, with that in mind, let's go ahead and
Sit
get
here for
started.
8 hours.
Yeah. Well, we also, we got to do fun things like, you've probably seen this in movies. They strap you into this apparatus and they drop you into the water, and underwater there's a diver down there and he counts to 5.
Yeah.
And then you unhook your seatbelt and swim off. Well, you start off, you're wearing swimming goggles and swimming trunks.
Yeah.
That's the first part.
Yeah.
Well, it goes through a lot of different stages, but at the end, you're in a mock-up of a helicopter container with four other people. You're wearing a flight suit, and you're wearing swimming goggles that have been painted black.
Oh my gosh.
Because that's the other thing.
So you can't see anything.
Well, that's the thing. They say that when the helicopter goes down, it turns over, and there's no light.
Yeah.
You just can't see anything.
Yeah.
But it's actually very easy, because if you remember, okay, well, there's one person in front of me, and the door is up and to the right. Even if you turn it down, it's always going to be up and to the right. So you just remember that.
It's nerve-wracking, though.
Well, I lived 3 times and I died once because the guy in front of me couldn't get out the door.
So it wasn't your fault.
Yeah, that's right. And the diver comes in and pulls you out at some point anyway. So that I think that's the most memorable, just because there was so much involved in it.
Lead up.
And because there aren't a whole lot of people that end up 200 miles offshore.
Yeah. And then you're on a rig out there?
Yeah, it's actually a really big drill ship.
Okay.
This one was called the Canmar Explorer 3. It's gigantic. I mean, it's much longer than a football field. Has a huge derrick on top of it.
Okay.
And you also, there are very strict environmental regulations. As you can imagine, with a derrick, before you drill anything, there has to be a place for the drill pipe to go through the ship. Well, there's a big open space and you can see water, and it's called the moon pool.
Okay.
Well, we had a very friendly seal show up, and the seal kept showing up in the moon pool. And if the seal is there, then we can't do anything. So at $1 million,
You gotta throw some fish on the other side.
you can't do that either. So no, at $1 million a day, we were sitting there sometimes waiting for our friendly seal to go away.
Wow. And then finally, the last question is, what is a question that you wish someone would ask you about your job, and why?
Well, that's even more difficult than the other one. I don't know that it's a single question, but the one thing that I wish people would understand and ask more about is, admittedly, there are some players in the energy industry that don't follow all the rules and regulations, and they pollute a lot. And as I said earlier, my undergraduate degree is in environmental sciences, and I remain very much an environmentalist. The thing is that what we do can be, and usually is, done very safely, very cleanly. There's, there shouldn't be any pollution involved with it. But unfortunately, again, there are problems, especially these days with hydraulic fracturing. There's a lot of misinformation, and I think there's just a lot that people don't understand about it. And really what it comes down to is if you drill the vertical part of the well and you seal it the way that it's supposed to be sealed, you drill the horizontal part. I mean, actually, this isn't exactly in order, but when you drill the horizontal part and hydraulically fracture it, as long as this upper part is properly isolated, it's no problem. So I wish people would have a little bit more understanding about the energy industry. But all that being said, I also hope that there are certain areas that remain off limits to drilling.
Yeah.
And that may be heresy to a lot of my friends in the oil industry, but that's my opinion.
You're an environmentalist at heart.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Well, nice speaking to you, and thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Don't forget to listen to the earth. You just may hear it speak.